Great, thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be hosting this panel on decentralized science. So before we start, I wanted to make a little icebreaker. So who here is actually familiar with DeFi, decentralized finance? If you could raise your hands. So as you might know, today's panel is actually not on DeFi, it's on DeSci. So I'd also like to ask, how many of you are actually familiar with decentralized science? Okay. Oh, okay. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, not bad. So there is a very similar context between generally research and Web3. So just to put a little more into context, who of you has ever worked with Open Zeppelin for developing their smart contracts? Okay, that is actually surprising. Another question is actually, who ever used open data for their research paper, for any other research purposes? So we're quite balanced. So as we already discussed before, there's a similarity between Web3. When someone is building on Web3, it is usually expected that it's open source, right? That not only everything is transparent, like the data that actually go through the system, but also the code behind it, and that isn't always true. And I believe this is very similar when it comes to research. Not always you actually have the data that is behind a research paper. So we're here today to dive deeper into this. Joined here by Bianca Bianca Trovò. So please, round of applause for Bianca.
Thank you. Should I?
Yes, if you could. Quick introduction.
Yeah.
I know you're an initiator of Ants Review, that you're actively involved in DeSci Paris. So.
Yeah. So basically, I am one of the first co-founders in DeSci. Before DeSci existed as a word, like back in 2020, I co-founded and initiated Ants Review, which is one of the first protocol for decentralized science, decentralized peer review. And I used to be a cognitive neuroscientist, like also Shadi here. Until my master's and PhD degree, I did basically cognitive neuroimaging. And then back in 2020, I started getting interested into blockchain technology because I wanted to solve some issues that I found in academia, in particular in meta science. So I would say since then I've been also involved pretty much in meta science. I'm also on the side a meta science researcher, kind of like helping organizations and publishing and working through initiatives mostly related on decentralized peer review or community peer review.
Thank you. Glad to have you on this panel. And then we're here joined by already mentioned Shadi Damaty, the co-founder of Holonym and the president of the board OPSI.
Thanks. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to go on the end here, but I guess, Riccardo, you'll be the meat on the sandwich for this one. Hi, everybody. My name is Shadi. Like Bianca, I've been working on DeSci past couple years. Also, it's funny because this, I think, panel is projects that had emerged either during or just before the bull market. Also, Research Hub was, I think, emerged around the same time. Background is in cognitive neuroscience, specifically contributing to open data, open tools. Really interested in how we could crowdsource and make available recordings and observations of the most complex system that we can ever encounter in the universe. Maybe I'll be proven wrong on this one day, but that is the human brain. And open data is incredibly important for that, which led to my journey into Web3. Co-founded a nonprofit called OPSI, which is a decentralized autonomous organization for open data aggregation. Solved a bunch of problems along the way, convinced some other folks to join us from academia, and more recently have focused primarily on on-chain privacy, specifically for identity, using zero-knowledge proof systems to solve key problems such as on-chain privacy with reputation imported from off-chain, and secure key custody and being able to recover your cryptographic keys. So I don't think we'll ever have the DeSci future that we deserve until we have really great UX for key custody and being able to control what we can say about ourselves on-chain.
Thank you, Shadi. Last but not least, we're here also joined by Riccardo Goldoni, Research Hub Foundation, PhD researcher in bioengineering, correct?
Hello everyone, I'm Riccardo. Real excited to be here, honestly, with these two DeSci OGs. Shadi was actually the first person that I talked to in the DeSci space when I started my journey into DeSci. Then after that, I joined Research Hub, and I'm going to be explaining a bit today what Research Hub does and what is my involvement in that. But basically, I run operations, so everything revolving around the community, but also the development of basically our offering on the platform is what I'm taking care of, along with other amazing people that are doing this job to basically make science better. So again, really excited. There's going to be a lot of things to talk about today, so stay with us. So academia has a lot of problems, and we're trying to fix at least some of them, I would say.
Thank you for the interaction, y'all. So let me start with actually the first question, if you will, Riccardo. We all know that you're the DeSci OGs, as you said, but we're all building actually in the DeSci ecosystem, DeSci sphere. So what was the challenge, what was the problem that brought you actually to work in the decentralized science space?
So I got into crypto Web3 back in the protocols that I found in research papers. You read a paper and you tend to believe that what you read is the truth. It has to happen as you read it. But then you may be trying to reproduce it in the lab and it doesn't work. And so you start to question yourselves, like maybe I'm not good enough. I cannot even reproduce something that I'm reading in a paper. And so it happened a couple of times, and I had this passion of like blockchain in the back of my mind. And so I was like, can maybe blockchain help solve the problem of this like reproducibility in science? Can we make science more reproducible with blockchain? Can we find a way to create some sort of like badges where people can independently reproduce research, and we cannot, we don't have to rely on citations and papers anymore, but we can rely on what actually really matters in science, which is reproducible science that people can use to build stuff on. And so I started to dive, and I was like, okay, let's see if there's something crazy as a mix in between, Web3 and science, and there was. Basically, the DeSci ecosystem was starting to get some traction in 2021. And so again, I saw her panel in Lisbon, and I got really interested, and then I started to look at some projects. I registered on Research Hub, but didn't really engage for some time. I actually started having a few calls with Shadi, because he was working in a data space that was getting into the healthcare data space as well, and so I was interested in that. And then at the end of it was December 2021, Brian Armstrong, the co-founder of Research Hub, puts out a tweet on Twitter where he was looking for editors to join this platform. I was like, well, that's pretty cool. It's something that I could definitely do. Let me look at what people are doing on this platform. And so I joined. I took the meeting call on Christmas Eve, and later I got basically the approval to join the platform as an editor. And so the editor basically is a curator. On Research Hub, we have a collection of papers. You can think about it as a Reddit for science. And so the editors are people that basically are curating a content within a specific topic. So for example, for me is bioengineering. And so I started this curation process, and I got hooked up by what Research Hub was doing, and I started to get more and more involved into that. And now I'm basically, as I said, running operations, so doing more broadly a lot a lot of things for a research hub. So yeah.
Great, thank you, impressive. Shadi?
Yeah, sure. Cool. Yeah, that's it's interesting kind of going back because time has moved so quickly, and I think the space has really differentiated. And when you ask me like what brought me into the space, I feel like I can answer that a couple different ways. One is just a really practical, like what happened, right? At the time, I was working on in Australia, and they were all using different back-end data infrastructure. So for a little bit of context, going through grad school, specifically in MR imaging research, where a lot of the code and the know-how and the knowledge is locked up in certain people's minds, right? So if you're going to make it big in this field, you have to go to that lab where, at MGH or, in ETH Zurich, where those people know how to go from raw MR data to usable data you can work with and get like these magical results, right? Do magic, literally, like black magic with magnets. And so, it was really challenging for me working in an imaging center trying to learn all this stuff from scratch. And what made a make or break moment for me in my career were the real OG decentralized scientists, which were these global hackathons organized by folks like Satra Ghosh and Cameron Craddock, PhD, PIs and researchers in the US. And they, for the first time, showed that how it was possible to really accelerate innovation by putting out open challenges and problems and having mentors come out and be at the disposal of young trainees. And so what you ended up having was an explosion of like applications and toolboxes and code for I would say decentralized MR imaging or neuroscience research. And so that's not too different from what we see in Ethereum, right? In the Ethereum community, which I think is part of the reason why I gravitated towards it. So the main problem I was trying to solve was how do we get these different institutions to all share their data in like a shared data fabric. Like one wanted to use Google Drive, another one wasn't allowed. You had to use Box, etc. And so I got really interested actually from somebody else on IPFS. It's the first Web3 thing I'd ever heard of actually was IPFS. And I was like, oh, great. Like, so we can just do a BitTorrent sort of situation. Instead of going through a third-party provider, we just put the institutions on the same level and pass the data between them. And it was a very ambitious project at the time. So we settled on a kind of like a proof of concept demonstration where we took a tool called Git Annex, which is binary version control for binary files. So definitely check it out if you're trying to version control binary files. It's really great. And we added IPFS support for that because it was kind of along the same lines. From there, heard about Filecoin. From there, heard about smart contracts. And then, I'm like Pikachu in the back of the room, like, oh my God. And so, yeah, so that's kind of what led me there. I was like, oh, let's just keep building on this. Got some grants, built some more solutions, built out an entire data commons, which took that solution and elaborated a little bit more to allow any researcher to archive these massive multi-terabyte data sets on the Filecoin Plus Notary program, which is basically like free, like a lifesaver for scientists that have these huge data sets that they need to archive or keep for posterity. So that's practically why I got in there. Now, what's interesting is subconsciously, I was at a point in my career where I had to make a decision. I'm gonna finish my PhD, go do a postdoc, maybe at UNC, maybe somewhere else, maybe drive an MR truck across the backcountry of the United States and collect people's brains. Oh, that sounds fun. Anything was possible at the time. But, the more I got closer to making a decision, the more I realized how incredibly stacked the odds were against most scientists, not just myself, but others in the field, like how difficult it was to get funding, and then seeing firsthand actually how innovative and incredibly creative and really like, I don't know how to describe it, like pure like builder's energy, like, coming from these hackathons, and then contrasting that to what I was seeing in the academic departments, completely different worlds. And I knew that if I went one route, I'll go so far away from the principles and the things that really brought me joy doing science, right? Like solving problems, working with data, and then moving more into this jack of all trades tool where you're just a glorified figurehead for bringing money and indirect costs to the university so that they can maintain their prestige. and as a trade-off, you get a couple brownie points and tenure, and you can do whatever you want, right? If you're lucky. So that's the two different sides of the coin of why I got into it.
Thank you. So, Bianca, what is your story? How did you get into DeSci?
It's hard to, well, I didn't get into DeSci because there was no official DeSci at the time. But I would say already back in 2019, I had this interest for meta science and everything related to open science. Also because the laboratory I was in was very much collaborating with groups more into open source development. And also I had the experience during my PhD of being invited several times to do peer reviews for papers. At the beginning, I was mostly a ghost reviewer, which is a very common issue in academia, where basically your supervisor asks you to review a paper under his or her name, and then you get no recognition for that, just the experience. And after a while, I was also invited by an editor of, an important editor for a journal, to review a paper. And of course, it was a lot of effort because you want to do it properly. It's your first time that you're gonna be officially a reviewer. And I remember this experience that took a lot of weeks of work and then months, because you get mails and letters back and forth from the authors. And then at the end, when the paper was finally published, I remember that I was astonished that we kind of, as reviewers, we contributed a lot on the final version of the paper, but this was not recognized in any way, because anyway, we were anonymous reviewers. So we were not even mentioned as anonymous reviewers in the paper. And I was like, okay, and now, in my PhD, I don't have any, I cannot put on my CV, I anonymously reviewed this paper, and it doesn't count for your, researcher score, because the only thing that counts is actually your citations on Google Scholar or other, platforms. And so I started thinking about this, how can you make the system more fair, such that other type of contributions to science, such as reviewing paper or collecting data, can actually be acknowledged and incentivized in a way that you are not actually taking time from your actual research, and doing something that is actually recognized by the community. And then I think it was kind of serendipity that I ended up learning about distributed ledger technology and blockchain and cryptography just out of interest, and then it kind of clicked. I was like, oh, maybe these are the tools that I could use to have a decentralized system where everyone can contribute into something and at the same time get incentivized for what they do. So I started thinking about a system that could merge blockchain and peer review. And at the time, I think it was beginning. So now we are back to the beginning of 2020, and March 2020 was the end of the world because of the pandemics, and it was also the black plague of crypto. And that's when I entered the space, because I was like, okay, now it's I'm not receiving any mails anymore. It's I can do whatever I want during my research time. It's not bothered at all. So I just started studying blockchain and crypto on my own. And then I decided to participate to a hackathon, which was actually ETH Turin, ETH local hackathon. And there I pitched the project, and I found a developer who became also my co-founder on Ants Review. And we developed this POC, proof of concept, in a couple of days, and we actually won the hackathon. And from that moment, actually, we gained visibility, and we ended up chosen for the first incubator, Web3 incubator by Gitcoin. So we were fellows at the Kernel Gitcoin Fellowship Program, the first block. And that was the moment when I actually the project was really further developed into an MVP, and we were mentored by people from the Ethereum Foundation, the Ethereum community. We had wonderful peers. It was an amazing time because it was all remotely, and we could interact, with Vitalik Buterin. We could interact with many people from Gitcoin. I remember actually Kevin Owocki was reviewing our code for the smart contracts. We had interaction with Austin Griffith too. and many like famous people in the space. So we kind of like I learned everything that was related to community, to Web3, and I wanted to make this bridge between science and especially open science and like the Web3 community. So since then, I've been doing this evangelization process in which I was speaking to academic conferences like SFN, which is like the biggest neuroscience conference, about Web3 and blockchain. And I've been doing this for like 1 year, mostly in 2021. And it was like, I was trying to sell like these tools to academics. And at the beginning I was like, I have to talk about blockchain, because if I mention crypto, it's gonna be bad, it's over. So I was talking about blockchain, Web3, so it was, and at the time we didn't use the word DeSci, and at some point I think I met Shadi on Twitter, was also interacting with other researchers and trying to do the same thing, like to bring people from the open science community into Web3 somehow. So we started, okay, let's organize something. Let's do a decentralized science community or panel or something. And that's how we had this panel in Lisbon back in 2021. But yeah, for a while it has been like a two-sided kind of operations, like one with researchers and with Web3 community on the other side. And suddenly, after 2022, we finally saw the first researchers like coming from the other side and reaching Web3 as well.
It's really interesting to see how this term decentralized science emerged from basically doing something using technologies that Web3 and blockchain gives us into a trend that is at the moment emerging. You really tapped an interesting thing with this research you didn't get credited, and with basically the incentive of working with Vitalik or Kevin Novak, and what is interesting here is like how the space is really, really small and how everyone knows each other. And I believe this is something we're building towards too. And this goes hand in hand with what you said. Being not credited on the research has to be really disappointing. So you've mentioned peer review. So I want to actually ask you, since there are several types of peer reviews, so well, when it comes to researchers, could you help us understand what is the difference between an anonymous and open peer review and other types of peer review, and what are eventually the pros and cons of these?
Yeah, maybe I can just briefly explain what peer review is, because so basically peer review is the validation process that we use in science for approve, let's say a paper, a publication that is at the preprint stage, so pre-publication, to be published on a journal. And it's kind of like the stamp of a journal for which you know, okay, this research has been like assessed by other peers within the community. It's sound, scientifically sound, so we can publish it. In a way, I like to see peer review as the analogous of like a consensus mechanism on the blockchain. So, and I think that's a really interesting analogy because you see many points in common, like until a block is actually validated by validators, it's not on-chain. So it's the same for like scientific studies in the pre-publication form of reprints. Until they are peer-reviewed, they are not officially scientifically approved. And normally in the field, like we have, like the most common type of peer review is a single blind peer review, which is anonymous, but it's anonymous only for the authors of the paper, in the sense that the reviewers know the identity of the authors, but not vice versa. So the identity of the reviewers is hidden. And this has some advantages because then the reviewers are free to comment on the paper, and they are like, let's say, free from retaliation from the authors.
Which if you go on Twitter and just search like open science or like peer review drama, right, use those keywords, you'll find tons of researchers complaining on Twitter saying like, hey, I was a peer reviewer for this project and I gave it a bad score, and then turns out later they shot down my grant, and I know this person was on the study section for that. So it's a really important like problem, and has tons of like social implications, right?
Yeah, and also like you mentioned the drama. So the drama, I think, covers many aspects of the peer review process because so we have the single blind, the double blind, which is this proposal of having both author and reviewer like anonymous to each other. But I think it's really hard to anonymize papers and also comments on the papers because normally you know who is working in a specific field. And also we have open peer review, OPR, which is promoted mostly by the open science community because it would open up a natural conversation on papers. The review is published along the paper. There are some journals who do that. For example, in the biomedical sciences, eLife has implemented that, and others. And the advantages is that you kind of like open up the dialogue between researchers, and at the same time you could promote also the participation of a younger like pool of researchers, because normally the problem of closed peer reviews that are managed by journals is that they tend to ask usual authors to review papers because they are the ones known within the community, so like senior postdocs or like professors. And yeah, I don't know if this answered the... So there is a main problem that people want to keep anonymity, but at the same time they want to keep open like access to peer review, and it's not possible yet. And one of the things that I also with others tried to propose, for example, me with AnswerView, was to combine both, and that's why you could use blockchain technology for that, because you can have like the open access aspect of having all the information accessible. In our case, we were leveraging IPFS. And at the same time, you have like this accountability given by the fact that all the information is immutable on chain and time-stamped. But at the same time, you would have anonymity and privacy preserving aspects given by cryptography.
Thank you for explaining.
But there's a but, because there's a problem. Actually, two problems. The first one is that peer review is unfortunately a very slow process. So what happens is you submit your manuscript to a journal. The journal has to go through this peer review process. What a journal does is they have to, first of all, find the peer reviewers. It is not the journal board that does the peer review. It is other people. And they have to find these people. There's a caveat to this. These people are not paid. So I guess, most of the people here don't really like, do stuff not paid. And so they are starting to really have problems in finding these people. And what happens when you don't find the people to do the peer review? Well, the process lengthens. And so you submit a paper, and then 1 month pass, and 2 months, and 3 months, and 6 months, and 12 months sometimes. So you can understand that like at the pace of which the research is going nowadays, it really makes a difference if your paper is coming out in 2021, or in 2022, or in 2025. So time is key. And we have this process that is incredibly slow, that is definitely not efficient, and we have an incentive problem. Because the people that are actually doing the work, the peer reviewers, are not paid. And so you can kind of see how all of this is connected. And I think really blockchain, and Web3 in general, can play a key role here in trying to incentivize people to do peer review. So rewarding these people for their contribution and making this open so that anyone can, earn their reputation online, and we can make this process faster. Have you, how many of you have heard about the superconductor story? The LK99, the floating rocks. Okay, I see a hand there. So basically there was this craze in August where it seemed that a group of researchers in Korea have found a piece of rock, a material that was superconducting at room temperature. That would have been like an incredible breakthrough in material science. It would have changed a lot of our lives. And so what happened, the crazy thing that happened is that people started to discuss science on Twitter in real time. So you see these videos coming up and people commenting like, hey, can someone replicate this? And companies, independent researchers, research groups started to replicate the studies because they needed an answer fast, rapid, as it happened with COVID. When COVID was out and people had to do research, because finding a solution to COVID meant saving thousands of lives. And so we have demonstrated with these two things that happened that we can make research faster in a digital world. Well, I think, blockchain can play a role in this, and that's, I would say, some of, the reasons why DeSci is here is to make science faster, more equitable, and more accessible to all.
And more transparent.
And more transparent, yeah.
So as we've spoken about peer review, I want to actually ask you, Shadi, well, why does anyone do a peer review? What is the incentives? As we've spoken about reputation, we spoke about privacy, credibility, transparency.
Yeah, it's a good leeway, I think, into that. One moment, I do want to take a moment and just take a snapshot of where we are right now. So we've been speaking primarily about research artifacts, right? So this ritualistic practice where years of work culminates in one manuscript, and that manuscript is taken as the source of truth, where you have your, everyone that contributed on the author list, you have your introduction where you pay homage to the, the tradition that gave forth, or the background of that project. You have the methods where you basically memorialize the recipe for how you got that, and then the individual results, and finally your take on that. So this is a very traditional, antiquated, whatever how you say that word, antiquated form of transmitting information that becomes all the more apparent if you've ever participated in an open source or open science ecosystem. So, back then it made a lot of sense. Like, you needed to have a whole letter that you would write to your colleague so they could, read through it and understand how you went through that process, and it was a much different world. Now, with the LK99 especially, we just need, when I look at a research paper, actually, I'm just looking at the methods. I'm looking to see how they did it. And then from there, if no red flags pop up, I'm on to the next paper. Otherwise, I'm looking at the results and then parsing those results out. I don't care about what their interpretation of the results are. I don't care about the tradition, because I've already learned about all this stuff. I already know all these stuff. I'm a contributing researcher. So in this case, what's more valuable is having bite-sized pieces of information. And in this case, peer review of the whole thing, right? Like, holding up a paper because in the introduction you didn't cite somebody is absolutely, it's absurd, right? You're gonna hold up a paper for a year, and this happens all the time because, while everything else is solid, it didn't do exactly what you wanted to do because whatever. Really silly. So I think one thing that both the open source community and Ethereum shares, any software development with the open science ecosystem, is moving less away from this kind of like chunked pieces of information, and more, how do we quickly trade bite-sized morsels that let us do science faster? And the reason why we should care about this is because as technology, and we've noticed it, right? Just during this bull cycle, how many new hype cycles have emerged based off of deep tech, zero knowledge, MPC, homomorphic encryption, you name it, right? As technology accelerates, right? Sure, we solve some problems along the way, but we make so many more problems. We open up so many more problems, whether it's AI related, whether it's related to health, whether it's related to, environment, blah, blah, blah. I think you guys know where I'm going with this. So it's incredibly important that our ability to innovate keeps up with our ability to create problems for ourselves in the process of pursuing solutions and civilizational progress. All that aside, to answer the question, yeah, it's really interesting because when you do have these artifacts, these multi-century artifacts of research papers, the real incentive there to look, to read it and peer review it is either A, for yourself to put your notes together and say, oh, like, this is what I got out of it, and I'm just going to do a service to the community and put my notes public, and they'll know what I think about it, and that's kind of like the open source review that Bianca mentioned. The other kind of more transactional, which it kind of comes for free, is people will do it because they expect to get something out of it. They said, oh, if I do this peer review, the editor is going to know me. So when I submit my magnum opus, when I am getting ready to apply for faculty positions, they'll come back to me and also give me good reviewers for my papers. They'll put a priority on my papers. So there's like some social dynamic there. So what does it come down to? It comes down to reputation. Right, it looks like it's free, but actually you're transacting in some, abstract commodity, right? Which itself, in some ways, can be tokenized through vouchers by journals to like convince you to keep reviewing. And so a lot of what we're seeing today in the conversation about peer review is, should we start paying peer reviewers for their time because there's this natural market that's emerged where there's tons of demand but very little supply. And I think it's because there's a saturation effect where it's not that valuable to peer review anymore. You're better off maybe like finding a very high impact, like finding a really great researcher to collaborate with and getting your paper out there instead of doing this work for free for nobody. The stats don't match up, and I think a big reason why is, and Bianca and Riccardo both pointed at this, is that you don't get your contributions don't make it to the record. So if you literally gave an incredible idea to this paper and it's included and put into publication, you don't get any credit for that. And so you don't join the scientific record. That doesn't help you with your grant applications or blah, blah, blah. So I think there's a real opportunity here to build distributed open source systems that let us import our off-chain, our reputation in the real world, and be able to memorialize them in a public bulletin board or a blockchain that anybody can look and check and see that this particular address, this particular account, this particular private public key set has all of this history of contributions that made it to this protocol, this paper, this grant application. And so we're seeing that now, but I think there's a lot of details that still need to be worked out.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, we're saying how it is not really the paper that makes the difference now. It's more like what you're publishing, and that should be continuously updated as new information emerge. Science also changes, the evidence changes, and so you should have a sort of like a version control, and science should probably learn something from open source software. How you do, like, you should be able to grab a manuscript, take it and do like a second version when you're actually, maybe running the same protocol, making the protocol better, and kind of like updating that. Think about the stars that you get on GitHub. You don't see the same thing in science with the peer reviews. You should, otherwise all of these scientists will have a lot of stars, but you don't really see them. And so what Shadi was mentioning, like the contributions, the reputation, you are currently not able to build it in the same way in the traditional science space. And so DeSci is trying to offer a new space where you can build this reputation online in a transparent and certified way via blockchain. So I think that's really important. And I'm thinking about science more functioning more like open source software.
Got it. Thank you. I'm really happy you tapped into the topic of actually using blockchain here, not only in peer review, but where I wanted to lead from the previous question was actually like, what does it actually mean to be in DeSci, be a decentralized scientist? I don't only mean using blockchain. There are projects out there, doing tokens, showing off like we're doing blockchain. But what does it really mean to be contributing to the space? Shadi, if you will.
Yeah, no, I perked up immediately when you said that. So it's an interesting question, right? Like, what does it mean to be a DeScientist? And we actually had a debate about this at ETH Denver last year, and this year, what year is it? Yeah, 2023 in February. And the last ETH Denver. And there we had like a really great representation from medical professionals, MD PhDs, that had heard about DeSci, that had heard about this new way potentially to overcome some of the challenges in career progression. And just like, basically like, it's a bunch of folks that are congregating around a shared sort of subconscious, I guess like, we're just pissed. We're just really pissed. And so it's bringing all these really mad people together, and they're like, man, this stuff sucks. So right now we're kind of getting through the ranting phase where we've been ranting and ranting and ranting, and we're all been hearing each other out. And we're moving towards the building phase. All right, now we're going to build a bunch of maybe good ideas, but mostly bad ideas, just to like get our hands dirty. And after this, hopefully come the great use cases that remind us why Ethereum and distributed ledger technology and decentralization tools like IPFS are really world-changing technological innovations that will help us meet the challenges and out-innovate the challenges that face us. So what does it mean to be a DeScientist? I think at its very, very core, it literally means that you don't need to rely on some gated ecosystem like a university or a particular research lab or research facility to answer fundamental questions about the universe, right? So most people that do science, that spend years and years of their life doing really low-paid work, free work, do it because they, are intellectually captivated and have a sense of fulfillment that you don't find in other industries, right? You're pushing the edge in what, in terms of what innovation is possible. You're looking at things that nobody else can look at before, whether it's like a picture of a black hole or some cell that's, looks all funky and is doing crazy stuff that only you understand. And so that sense of mirth, that sense of joy as a decentralized scientist, you're participating in that in a way that's permissionless, that's open, and that's intrinsically rewarding in of itself, right? Where we create this ecosystem that can be a closed ecosystem. It could also be open, right? It could dock into different pluralistic worldviews around what science should be. That rewards and perpetuates that, right? So it's everything from funding, from tooling for attribution, from resources, accessing data and being able to cite these things, mentorship, continued education, that sort of thing. So I think at its core, it very much is a philosophical perspective. The technology layers on top of that when we try to accomplish certain things that are difficult and need to do them very quickly and coordinate very easily. And I think that's where Ethereum kind of fits in. I would like to say that probably all you guys here are D-scientists, but you just don't realize it yet. If you at any point in your life you've gone down a rabbit hole and couldn't get out, you're one with the movement, come join us.
I mean, the movement is growing. Just to illustrate it, I was actually reading this morning on the airport when flying here a post from Her DAO. Right, they started as two free scientists. Now they've grown to a large DAO, and they're already sitting in the lab and putting here the impact on actually the funding element is really important. I'd also say that. I mean, there is a lot of people that want to support a good cause that also are in crypto, and I believe that actually DeSci is not only helping with funding but also raise awareness to several causes.
Projects really
yeah,
quick.
sure, go ahead.
And maybe you guys can continue if I miss anyone. So projects that are actually doing decentralized science today. You could go, if you want to get a good comprehensive list or partially comprehensive list, look at the last Gitcoin grants round, actually Gitcoin grants round 15, which there was a whole decentralized science sub-round where I think it was like $500,000 were put in a matching pool. Springer Nature put in some money, Juan Bennett put in some money, Vitalik put in some money, Molecule put in some money, and we had about like 100 projects or so. Everything from, cat longevity to marine biology and sustainability to human subjects research, all sorts of stuff, basic tooling. Some of my favorite projects in the space are those that focus more on the critical components of building a scientific ecosystem, and maybe aren't so tech savvy yet or don't have a coin or anything, but Active Inference Institute has been a very early adopter of all things Web3 and DeSci. But funny enough, you won't find much of that in their stack. They do incredible work, basically teaching some of the most difficult concepts in neuroscience to a global audience, making it very accessible. Genomes DAO, which actually does have a token, is an organization that was co-founded by the founder of Figshare. If you're familiar with Figshare, it's a huge open science project that was acquired by Springer Nature, by the parent company for, I think, Digital Science, actually. And let's see, who else is out there? You guys might not know about. There's the Gosh Network, which they've been putting a lot of work into decentralized science on their L2. There's, who else am I missing out on? There's, of course, the Molecule Gang. You got the Vita DAOs, the Hair DAOs, the Athena DAOs for reproductive women's healthcare. I think that's incredibly important. And yeah, maybe you guys wanted to fill in the blanks with some other ones as well.
Yeah. I mean, something I wanted to say is that I think DeSci is going through stages, and we're probably now at stage 2. DeSci probably started as like ideological, so it was like the "we are pissed" moment, and so we were shouting out the problems. We were like, "Okay, this is not working. This is not working. This is also not working," and I was like, "Okay, what do we do?" And now the DeSci space has grown a lot. Like if you, I don't know if there's a versioning of the DeSci wiki, where you see all the projects, because there's this really cool DeSci wiki that lists all the projects created by Jocelyn Pearl. And like if there was a version control, you would see how that list has grown a lot. from 2020 to now 2023. So the space has definitely grown, attracted a lot of interest. Pfizer had put some money into VitaDAO. Springer Nature is now talking DeSci. Just a few days ago, a Nature article, so Nature, came out about talking about DAOs, about the space. And so it has grown as a space, and now we're in that second phase, which is not that we are pissed anymore. Now it's like, okay, now let's find a solution. And so we are building the tools. Shadi mentioned some. I would also to shout out DeSci Labs, which are building the new generation of the scientific article. So the artifacts, the new generation of like how do we see science being communicated. And so DeSci nodes, definitely go check it out. So I would say, again, now we are creating the infrastructure to make science better so that when we go out with a call to action, so like if you're pissed, please join us. Now we can provide you with the tools to actually do so. That doesn't mean that you would not publish a paper anymore. That would be crazy. But at the same time, we are creating an alternative for all those people that do not want to go through the traditional path anymore and want something alternative. So I think that's really remarkable because it's just a couple of years. And the space has grown a lot, and we've built a lot of really good stuff. So I'll leave it maybe out to Bianca if she wants to mention some other projects.
Yeah, actually, I lost track of all the things I wanted to, to comment because actually I wanted, before you mentioned GitHub, I wanted to talk about decentralized GitHub for science, which is kind of like what we want to do in a way, specifically for publication aid data, but it's kind of like this version control system that is owned and like operated by a scientist. And I think this would be the way to go for having like open source, open science, which is decentralized. And it's really interesting because it goes back to the topic of reputation, and as Riccardo and Shadi were mentioning. And the problem that we see right now in academia and that DeSci and the scientists are trying to solve is actually to shift the power of like what is considered to be prestige, reputable in academia. Because right now is like there is a lot of the middlemen in academia are mainly the publishers. Also, there are other figures, but it's like all the reputation of a scientist is around the journal. It's around the prestige of the journal. So in a way, like what we are trying to do is similar of what Gitcoin has been implemented with quadratic funding for crowd-sourced funding, and trying to shift the power from like a few powerful stakeholders to a crowd of people that are interested in specific problems and public goods. So this is like science is a public good. And Gitcoin has been doing this for many years, and we started with a few projects. Now we actually have Gitcoin rounds for DeSci specifically. And the idea is to actually involve not just scientists, but any citizen science, like any person who is interested in specific causes in science. Like Oliver was mentioning, like the fact that DAOs are really tackling specific issues in undervalued and underfunded research fields in science. For example, also the DAOs that you mentioned, Shadi, like Afina DAO is tackling like women research. We also have Fleming Protocol. We have SciDAO, which is tackling like psychedelic research for psychiatric therapy and purposes. And so I think the emphasis is around community, and that's what we are seeing a lot in DeSci, like building communities where not only researchers but also citizens can identify themselves and gather together without the mediation of like basically people that are gatekeeping the money and the prestige of the validation of a scientific process. And I think it's really interesting what you guys mentioned about this problem. You know, like we had COVID, we had like an explosion of preprints in scientific publications that were way over the amount of peer reviews that were available at the time, because we don't have many reviewers that can actually guarantee this validation. And I think this is when we started seeing like this importance of having like more of a crowd-sourced community kind of like movement, bottom-up, rather than top-down. And actually, in the open science movement, we had a lot of initiatives around that, and we have more and more community reviews initiatives from open science organizations like AzaBio, and like pre-review, and we have like communities that try to gather preprints which are relevant in specific domains, like pre-lights for for the biological field. So this is really interesting. It's not happening in Web3 yet. It's in Web 2. But I think we already have like a sort of decentralized community that is operating also on Twitter. Like lots of scientists, they leave comments on like science publications, and all this value is lost because it's not like captured through Web3 infrastructure. And an interesting thing, in fact, would be to see like a sort of like retroactive recognition of scientific work. And this, like, it has been happening for specifically for GitHub and other like open source development tools. There are some projects like SourceCred who did that in a sort of retroactive airdrop of tokens that can give recognition to actions performed on the blockchain. And I think this would be really interesting because then we would finally have proper recognition also on publications and any type of like contribution in science, and it kind of links to what Vitalik Buterin was mentioning when he talks about retroactive funding for science, but in general for any type of like Web3 project.
Yeah, I'm really happy actually to tackle Gitcoin. We heard a lot of Gitcoin here, and really, what I think...
You're not sponsored by Gitcoin
No, we're
today.
not sponsored, but what I want to actually put attention to is like, this enables everyone to be a researcher. I know you said something in that context, like that with access to decentralized tools, to Web3, let's say, funding, to public goods funding through platforms such as Gitcoin, anyone can go out there with a cause and raise enough money to go do what they want to do.
Even more, like if you cannot be a researcher, not everyone can be a researcher. I think what is really, really cool and kind of like rebellious about DeSci is that if you really care about something and you have a group of people that care about something, okay, we have this research field that is not really well funded. Let's talk about, some of these rare diseases that are not really well funded, and you have a community of people that really care about the problem. What you can now do is spin up a DAO, and they're like, you know what, we're gonna raise some funds, and we cannot do the research, but we can use these funds to have researchers actually do the research that we care about. That was not possible before. That was not really, or at least it was not that easy. It was not as easy as it could be now with BioDAOs. So I think BioDAOs are really an excellent example of what can be practically done via DeSci. We care about a problem. We know this is a problem that very few people recognize. But what we're going to do is we're going to coordinate, and we are going to raise the funds to actually, trying to tackle that problem.
And yeah, just to bounce out the conversation and kind of bring back this theme that I introduced earlier, which is, okay, great, now we have DAOs where anybody can investigate any problem. Anybody can investigate any problem, whether it's flat Earth, whether it's what have you, right? So you're opening up the tools for innovation that might even be dangerous, right? Like, for example, gain-of-function research. What happens if that becomes DAOified, right, for viruses or something like that? So, just keeping in mind that like the more problems that we solve, the more technology we introduce, the more problems that we inherit as well. And we're always kind of playing this catch-up game until, I guess, super intelligent AI bails us out or just wipes us out. We'll see. But I guess the point that I really wanted to bring about, and kind of bringing us back also to Gitcoin and quadratic voting, and pointing back to Glenn Weil's paper with Vitalik Buterin, and how we can avoid these types of situations, right, where we have these DAOs that are driven by these like meme coins that are, trying to figure out like how deep is the ocean. They just keep like sending people to like dive in there and like die or something, right? Like, and then we just rewarding that with it, like, these nightmare scenarios. The idea is that we can have through quadratic funding that there's wisdom in the crowds, right? So instead of in a normal funding paradigm where you have a winner take all, so like for all the statisticians out there, you kind of have like this Poisson distribution where there's only a couple projects that take home most of the matching funds and the grant funds home. And now you're broadening or smoothing out that function to include the tails of the distribution. Now what's cool about that is now you're not only distributing and the general concept is, over time, in this paper they argue that this sort of funding will drive us towards solving more problems than making problems. And so there's a very deep, I guess, kind of, like when we think about design parameters for tokenomic systems or how do we get people to behave in the right way, making that distribution as fat as possible, but also iterative so that you're kind of chopping off the tails after a certain point, right? And letting these projects take on their own lives and eventually fork off the protocol so that they're not dependent on the protocol for funding, and you kind of retain it as a kind of a ground level signal boost that can give us what we need to fund the research that will take us these next steps.
Yeah. Well, I guess that was actually more than enough for the question. I just wanted to ask a little follow-up, as we already said that yeah, everyone can be a researcher, right? So on a final note, I actually wanted to ask you all, what do you think that the general public, whoever here in the crowd, can actually do to support DeSci if they don't want to be a researchers, if they want to help just DeSci to win or support their favorite cause?
Maybe Riccardo.
Maybe. Okay, let me start. Well, talk about us. If you don't want to join us, at least talk about us. I think the most important thing that DeSci needs, apart from people that actually come and work in DeSci, because the builders are obviously important. They need to lay the ground and the fundamentals to build what we're trying to build, but it's also awareness. The more awareness we can bring to the space, the easier it will be for us to bring down the ivory tower, to change the paradigm that we see today in science. So there's a lot of researchers and scientists out there. So everyone, I think, in DeSci is trying to do their best to bring in the people. So for example, me, I'm still in my PhD life, and so what I did is I told all of my research lab mates about DeSci. They were not really enthusiastic because they were not getting the concept. And so I had to sit down and tell them, like, hey, you see, these are the problems. These are some of the ways in which we can fix these problems. And so most of the time it's the tech. Like, the tech is the barrier. And so what can other people do is that if you're good at communicating complex concepts in a really easy way, that's something that is really useful for DeSci, because we need communicators. We need to really make the tech easy so that other people can understand and can join us. And there's all the time of the world to learn the tech and to learn how to operate in DeSci. But first of all, we need the people. We need the people to join the movement and believe in what we are believing.
Shout out to DeSci world here. Actually, they're doing what you're talking about. They're being the messengers, actually passing on to the message about all the great causes that are in DeSci space. Bianca?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think connecting to what Shadi was saying about the fact that we need to be careful of, the possibility of having anyone jumping to DeSci also with not good intention or trying to make a sort of fake science within.
Or don't give up your kidneys for some DAO.
Yeah, it's I think the point will be, the goal will be not to create a parallel universe, not a promised land where we will be gathered just among ourselves, but we need to be conscious of all the problems that are in science now. So we need this constant dialogue between the DeSci community and the scientific community. We cannot build our own DAOs and just stay in our world. I think it's really important. And I think we already see two trends. In DeSci, people who are more acting as facilitators, kind of like DeSci founders who promote DAOs for funding research in which actual real scientists in academia are being supported. And at the same time, we are already seeing independent researchers as the scientists in a way, I'm also belonging to this crowd because actually it's funny, I'm not currently affiliated to any institution in academia, but I'm still publishing. And I'm still asked by journals to do peer reviews for paper, which is a signal of the fact that actually, and this we have seen it a lot through the preprint community and like open science movement. It's not true that you need to be in an institution and you need to operate through journals. Like actually, the validation, the fact of doing science can be decoupled from like the publication industry.
Great.
And I think it's really interesting. For sure, I don't see it coming like soon that we will have like independent researcher who learn science on their own and they will start doing science as the scientists. Probably we will still see like actual researchers from maybe official academic institutions, but probably we're going to see another phenomenon of de-education. These schools.
We're kind of slowly running out of time, so I would like just to give a word quickly to Shadi.
Yeah, and I'm definitely giving enough words today, but yeah, until we see distributed mentorship networks, and that's the dream that we're building towards. But in terms of what you guys can do, if there's something that strikes home with you, is just I think engage with the content, talk not only about us, but with us. There's tons of great opportunities to perform behavioral research for these projects, basic, simple UX research, like, would you use this, right? Would you actually use these products, and why wouldn't you, right? What are the problems there for you? And then secondly, I think we all share, whether you're a scientist or not, a pretty overlapping code of ethics, and I think moving forward, we need to be able to root this movement and everything that comes out from it in some, the outcomes of some very difficult conversations, right? Like, what are things that we should collectively, maybe there are things that are taboo, or maybe there aren't other things that we should challenge ourselves and try to get around. So those are my words. I also wanted to thank big shout out to Oliver for being moderating today, and shout out to Data Lake as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Applause to my panelists, DeSci, Riccardo, and Bianca. Thank you, guys.